They say that trust is the foundation of any marriage, but for me, trust was the beautifully designed trapdoor that my husband, Liam, patiently waited for me to fall through. For 6 years, I believed I had built a life with a man of impeccable honesty and shared ambition. We were partners in every sense, in love, in life, and, as I would soon discover, in a devastating, multi-layered financial and familial deception. I was 35 when I met Liam, a successful financial consultant with a brilliant yet ruthlessly entrepreneurial spirit. I was a high school teacher, grounded, practical, and a firm believer in transparency. Our compatibility was immediate and intense. We married quickly, united by a common desire for stability and a slightly unconventional goal: to build a high-profit business together that would allow us both early retirement and the freedom to start a family without the stress of mortgages. Liam launched a small boutique financial services firm 2 years into our marriage. I used the entirety of my life savings, nearly $50,000, to help fund the initial capital, a gesture of faith I never once regretted, as his success immediately validated my investment. The firm immediately took off, propelled by Liam's shrewd investment sense and tireless, sometimes obsessive, work ethic. Early on, he introduced me to the third person in this professional triangle, his business partner, Clara. Liam explained that Clara was an administrative and logistical genius, a highly organized professional who managed the firm's complex client communications, compliance filings, and specialized tax structures. Clara lived 3 hours away, but she was a constant, if remote, presence. Liam spoke to her daily, sometimes for hours, often late into the evening, citing urgent client needs, critical compliance deadlines, and SEC filings. I never met Clara in person, which was the first detail that should have raised alarm bells. Liam always insisted their work was entirely virtual and remote, citing Clara's chronic, severe social anxiety and her preference for communicating only via encrypted channels. When the business had its first profitable year, I suggested a celebratory dinner with Clara, perhaps a Zoom dinner to respect her anxiety. Liam quickly shut down the idea, his voice stern and final, citing Clara's strict privacy boundaries and her absolute refusal to interact socially. It was strange, but I trusted Liam's explanation. Clara was a necessary, invisible cog in the machine that was funding our future. I trusted him implicitly with our finances, our dreams, and my absolute unwavering devotion. The only person who showed suspicion was Liam's own mother, Patricia, a notoriously sharp and critical woman. She once asked Liam, "That Clara woman, if she's so indispensable, why is she never at the Christmas party? And why do her expenses look like monthly rent payments, not admin invoices?" Liam had dismissed his mother's comments as old-fashioned meddling, but Patricia's skepticism lingered in my mind. The true fracture in the foundation appeared 6 months ago, and it was financial, not emotional. I had taken a new part-time job, consulting for a nonprofit that required me to file my own taxes for the first time since we married. While reviewing our joint tax returns from the previous year, which Liam always handled with meticulous, obsessive secrecy, I found a Schedule C form, the official form used for reporting business income and expenses. Under the independent contractor payments section, a single devastating line item jumped out: a payment of $85,000 to C. Reyes Administrative Services. C. Reyes, Clara Reyes, $85,000. That was an exorbitant amount for administrative services, even for a busy boutique firm. I knew Liam paid her well, but this was nearly 3 times the average salary for a full-time, high-level office manager in our city. I asked Liam about it that evening, trying to keep my tone light and conversational, but my internal alarm bells were deafening. Wow, Clara must be absolutely brilliant. $85,000 for admin work is beyond incredible. Is she running the entire back office now? Liam's reaction was immediate, visceral, and chillingly aggressive. He became instantly defensive, his usual calm, controlled demeanor replaced by a cold fury I had never witnessed. Don't ever look at the business tax filings again, Sarah. That is my domain. The payment structure is complex and involves performance bonuses and specific non-disclosure agreements. It's confidential. You are an employee of the firm, not a partner in the finances. His reaction was a monumental red flag, not just because of the secrecy, but because of the explicit, venomous boundary he had just drawn between us. The money, I realized, was not for admin work. It was a payment for something he desperately wanted to keep hidden, and his mother, Patricia, had sensed the fraud months ago. My suspicions were now fully aroused, and they were centered entirely on the money. I couldn't access his business accounts directly, but I had access to our joint personal accounts, where his income and the business profits were deposited. I knew I couldn't trust Liam's evasive accounting anymore. I discreetly hired a specialized forensic accountant, a discreet friend from my teaching days whose husband worked in finance, promising absolute confidentiality and framing the inquiry as a precautionary measure before we invested in a new, larger property. The accountant's findings were not what I expected. She found 2 strange, recurring financial patterns that defied all business logic. First, the large, recurring monthly wire transfers, not from Liam's business to Clara, but from Liam's personal account to an account named the Reyes Family Trust. These transfers, labeled simply loan repayment, totaled nearly $200,000 over the past year. Second, she flagged a series of small, weekly but consistent deposits from an unfamiliar account named the Reyes Adoption Fund into the Reyes Family Trust account. The pattern was consistent, meticulous, and completely baffling. Why was Liam repaying a massive loan to his administrative partner? And why was this trust fund receiving deposits from an adoption fund? The money trail was leading me away from a simple affair and deep into a convoluted financial and potentially criminal conspiracy. Armed with the forensic accountant's chilling report, I realized my husband wasn't having a conventional affair. He was meticulously maintaining a colossal financial secret that threatened the entire foundation of our shared life. The total money he had transferred to the Reyes entities, including the large contractor payment and the personal loan repayments, exceeded $500,000 over 2 years. This wasn't payment for admin work. This was a lifetime investment in something he valued more than our marriage. I confronted Liam again, this time with the undeniable financial evidence laid out on the kitchen counter. The bank statements, the tax forms, and the strange, incriminating names. C. Reyes, the Reyes Family Trust, the Reyes Adoption Fund. Explain the Reyes Family Trust, Liam, and explain why you've transferred almost $500,000 from our joint funds to this trust. This is not administrative work. This is a secret financial agreement you've concealed with fraud. You are hiding a massive investment from me, I stated, my voice shaking with a cold, desperate calm that barely masked my inner devastation. Liam's immediate reaction was the most terrifying yet. He didn't erupt in fury or dissolve into pathetic apologies. He became completely, frighteningly emotionless, adopting the same controlled blankness I had witnessed when he told me to stay out of his business. He simply stared at the papers, then at me, and sighed. "I didn't want you to find out this way, Sarah. I was trying to protect you from the complexity. I was trying to protect our future." He confessed to the large financial transfers, but his explanation was a calculated, partial truth. He claimed Clara wasn't a business partner, but a highly sensitive, high-net-worth client who had suffered a devastating loss in a previous investment and was now rebuilding her portfolio with highly unconventional, secretive structures. The payments, he claimed, were investment funds and management fees that were structured to look like loan repayments to minimize tax liability and conceal her identity. He had fabricated the administrative partner story to protect her identity and her assets from public scrutiny. The lie was brilliantly clever, leveraging my belief in his financial shrewdness and his ethical boundary pushing. But the explanation did not cover the small, crucial detail, the Reyes Adoption Fund. I pushed him hard on this, my finger trembling as I pointed to the bank statement. The Adoption Fund, Liam. Why is your client receiving deposits from an account explicitly named Adoption Fund? Does your client have a child she adopted? You're lying to me again. Tell me the truth about C. Reyes. His eyes darted away, his silence stretching into an agonizing chasm. That's when I stopped asking him and started searching for Clara Reyes myself, refusing to wait for his next polished lie. I used the only piece of concrete information I had, the address associated with the Reyes Family Trust, a small, generic rental home 3 hours away, carefully chosen to be outside our immediate circle. I took a day off, telling Liam I was visiting my sister, and drove straight there. The house was unremarkable, set on a quiet suburban street. I parked across the road and waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold premonition settling over me. After an agonizing hour, the front door opened, and a woman stepped out carrying a small child wrapped tightly in a blanket. It was Clara Reyes. She was exactly as Liam described, young, attractive, and unremarkable. But in her arms she held a tiny, dark-haired baby, no more than 6 months old. My initial thought was, she adopted a baby. Liam is her financial advisor, and he's helping her with the adoption fund. But as Clara Reyes turned to lock the door, the baby shifted, and I saw his face clearly. The baby's face was a mirror image of Liam's. Not just a faint resemblance, but the same deep-set eyes, the same strong, square chin, the exact dark curl of hair that Liam himself possessed, a curl I often ran my fingers through. The baby was unequivocally Liam's son. The blood rushed from my head. I leaned against the steering wheel, fighting a wave of profound nausea and dizzying shock. This was not an affair that ended quickly. This was a child born to Liam and his business partner, a current physical product of his continuous deception. I grabbed my phone and quickly snapped a discreet photo of Clara and the baby. I drove home, the truth a razor blade twisting in my gut. But the final terrifying realization came as I pieced together the financial documents again, combining them with the image of that baby. If Liam and Clara were having a secret affair that produced a child, why the elaborate financial setup? Why the massive upfront $85,000 contractor payment, and why the adoption fund transfers. It didn't add up to a simple, messy betrayal. I looked at the legal documents once more. The massive initial payment of $85,000 wasn't filed as a salary or a bonus. It was filed as fee for services rendered, contractual obligations. The total amount was eerily close to the standard, high-end fee for a commercial surrogacy contract in the state. The adoption fund was a decoy name for a legal requirement, an escrow account for the baby's future care. Clara wasn't his mistress. Clara was his surrogate. The truth was far darker and more cold-blooded than mere infidelity. Liam hadn't just cheated on me. He had legally and financially orchestrated the creation of a child without my knowledge, and he had done so to bypass me and avoid the messy, emotional, and legal entanglements of fatherhood. The massive $85,000 payment to Clara was the fee for the surrogacy services. The recurring loan repayments were the mandated child support and living expenses that were carefully disguised to evade detection by me and, more critically, by his business partners and clients. The key to the whole scheme was my miscarriage. Liam and I had always wanted children, but I had experienced a difficult, traumatic miscarriage early in our marriage that left me emotionally scarred and hesitant to try again immediately. Liam, a man obsessed with control and achieving his desired outcome, must have decided he couldn't wait for my emotional recovery. He didn't want a public divorce and a messy custody battle, so he bypassed me entirely. He must have used his own sperm and a donor egg, or perhaps Clara's own egg, and paid her to carry the child to term, structuring the contract as a business arrangement to keep it secret. I confronted Liam one last time, this time with the definitive, irrefutable accusation. I placed the picture of the baby next to the $85,000 payment slip and the Reyes Trust documentation. Clara Reyes is not your business partner, Liam. She's the woman who delivered your son. You paid her $85,000 to be your surrogate, and you've been funding a secret family, a separate legacy. Explain the surrogacy contract. Liam's final reaction was utter surrender. He finally gave up the facade of the client and the loan. He was defeated, and his final confession was calculated to wound me deeply. I did it because I knew you wouldn't give me the child I deserved, Sarah. You were too emotional after the miscarriage. You were weak. You were delaying my life plan. I needed a stable, healthy son to secure my legacy, and I found a professional, discreet solution that didn't rely on your emotional timeline. He admitted he used his own sperm and a donor egg purchased from a reputable bank, ensuring the child was genetically his. Clara was simply the gestational carrier, paid to disappear after the birth, but his continued financial support kept her tethered to him and the secret. The emotional impact was immediate and devastating. He had called me weak and a delay. The man I loved, the man who had held me and comforted me after my miscarriage, had been simultaneously planning to replace me and our potential family with a genetically engineered, transactional alternative. The betrayal was not of the body. It was a betrayal of my fundamental worth as his wife, my emotional resilience, and my right to grieve on my own terms. In my devastation, I remembered Liam's mother, Patricia, and her pointed questions about Clara's mysterious invoices. I called her immediately, pouring out the entire sickening story. Patricia, surprisingly, didn't express shock over the surrogacy. She expressed rage at the financial structure. "The fool!" "I knew that Clara's checks were too high," she roared, and then the final chilling piece of complicity fell into place. Patricia had known about the miscarriage, and she had often pressured Liam, telling him that my emotional fragility was jeopardizing the family lineage. She confessed her part, Patricia admitted coldly. "I knew he was getting a child. I didn't know he was paying her such an exorbitant fee, or doing it behind your back after you used your savings for his firm. The fraud is financial, Sarah, not just emotional. You need to hit him there." She confessed that Liam had confided in her about his plans to discreetly arrange for a child, seeking her assurance that the matter could be kept quiet from me. She had advised him to find a discreet solution, essentially giving him the maternal green light for his betrayal. I immediately filed for divorce, not just on the grounds of adultery, which the surrogacy contract arguably was, due to the emotional and financial secrecy, but on the grounds of financial fraud and gross breach of fiduciary duty. The complexity increased tenfold when Liam's actual business partner, Michael, got involved. Liam had been using their firm's expense accounts, claiming consulting fees and offshore regulatory expenses to funnel money for the surrogacy and Clara's subsequent living expenses. Michael, realizing Liam had been skimming from the firm's profits and exposing them to massive legal and tax liabilities, immediately joined my legal team as an interested party. The three of us, the betrayed wife, the financially ruined business partner, and the angry mother-in-law, who provided crucial evidence about the secretive financial structures, were now united against Liam. The court proceedings were a spectacle of corporate and personal avarice. Liam, desperate to maintain his reputation and his wealth, tried to argue that the surrogacy contract was a private endeavor funded by separate, non-marital assets, and that my withdrawal of initial capital from the firm voided my right to his profits. This was quickly dismissed as absurd. My attorney, backed by Michael's testimony and Patricia's internal financial knowledge, proved that Liam had systematically diverted joint marshal funds and corporate assets for a private secret purpose. The court proceedings revealed the true, sickening nature of their agreement. Clara, under a subpoena that required her to testify about the business consulting fees, admitted she was a professional surrogate who agreed to a highly confidential arrangement. She confirmed that Liam had structured the contract to guarantee her silence and her physical distance from his marital life. The money wasn't payment for love. It was a contract for silence and services, a fee that ensured she would be a non-factor in his life. The judge was visibly appalled by the clinical, transactional nature of the deception. He ruled that Liam's actions constituted severe marital fraud, a gross breach of fiduciary duty, and a stunning abuse of marital trust. I was awarded the marital home, a significant portion of his firm, which was immediately liquidated, and Liam was ordered to pay back all the money he had fraudulently diverted to the Reyes entities. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Liam. His business was officially dissolved due to the commingling of personal and professional fraudulent finances. He was left with a collapsed career, substantial debt, and sole custody of a baby he had paid to create. His mother, Patricia, publicly disowned him, not for the ethical crime, but for the financial recklessness that ruined her son's legacy. The ultimate irony was that the woman who had encouraged him to seek a child discreetly was the one who provided the insider knowledge to take him down financially. I, meanwhile, was left with a shattered heart and a new, unexpected reality. I was alone, but I was financially stable and, most importantly, free from the continuous lie. The existence of Liam's son, whom he had named Adam, was a constant, painful reminder of the betrayal. I couldn't just walk away from the situation. I had to process the fact that the child was innocent, a pawn in his father's game. In a bizarre twist of fate, I ended up meeting Adam again. Liam, desperate and utterly overwhelmed by the chaotic reality of being a solo parent to an infant, a life he never intended to live without my support, called me one day, not for money, but for genuine, desperate help with the child. I initially refused, but my protective maternal instincts, honed from years of teaching, eventually won out. I agreed to meet Adam at a supervised park, keeping a strict distance from Liam himself. The moment I saw Adam, the anger momentarily receded. He was a beautiful, innocent baby who shared Liam's features but none of his toxicity. I spent an hour with him, the simple act of holding the child Liam created, without me being a strange form of healing. It was then I realized that my forgiveness was not for Liam, but for myself. I needed to move past the anger to reclaim my own capacity for maternal love, even for a child that represented my greatest trauma. I made a tough decision. I would not integrate Adam into my life, but I would not be an enemy to him either. I set up an anonymous fund to support Adam's future education, a clear line drawn between my compassion for the child and my final, absolute rejection of the father. I refused to let Liam use Adam as a tool for reconciliation. I maintained a strict, no-contact rule with Liam, communicating only through our attorneys. The final chapter of my divorce was the realization that my intuition had been right all along. Liam wasn't just my husband, he was a transactional individual who viewed every relationship through a financial lens. Our love was real to him, but his need for control and a perfect legacy superseded all emotional bonds. He had not trusted me to be a strong, resilient partner after the miscarriage. He saw me as an obstacle to be circumvented. I spent the next year rebuilding my life. I quit my teaching job and used my settlement money to start a small business, helping people navigate personal financial crises, a direct response to the fraud I had suffered. My experience made me uniquely empathetic and highly skeptical of financial facades. I found a new purpose in exposing deceit, a strange but powerful legacy born from Liam's betrayal. The money I had invested in his firm ultimately bought me my freedom and my new, honest career. The years that followed the divorce were less about healing and more about transformation. I changed my approach to every facet of my life. I went from being the trusting partner who happily delegated all financial authority to a hyper-vigilant, skeptical businesswoman who scrutinizes every contract, every line item, and every unexplained expense. My professional success grew directly out of my trauma. Clients were drawn to my story and my genuine desire to protect them from the kind of sophisticated financial deception Liam specialized in. The irony was not lost on me. I was building a far more successful and meaningful life on the ruins of the fraudulent one Liam had planned for us. I occasionally hear updates about Liam and Adam through our co-parenting legal mediator and through Michael, Liam's former business partner, who became a loyal friend and a critical source of emotional support. Liam struggles immensely with the relentless, lonely demands of solo fatherhood and the shattered reputation that makes finding steady, high-level work difficult. The irony of him being utterly overwhelmed by the very legacy he aggressively sought is a constant source of bitter, profound justice. He wanted the perfect son without the imperfect, emotional process of a real shared partnership, and he ended up with the responsibility but none of the true support. His son, Adam, is a constant, visible reminder of his failure to be a good husband, a failure that eclipses any success he might find as a father. Clara Reyes, the surrogate, eventually moved on entirely. She used the substantial funds from the settlement to start a completely new life, fulfilling the transactional agreement with Liam, who was no longer capable of holding up his side of the bargain. She escaped the drama, proving she was indeed a professional who simply rendered a highly secretive service for an extremely high fee. Her cold, businesslike detachment throughout the entire ordeal was the ultimate confirmation that my husband's relationship with her was purely a contract, not an emotional bond. It made the betrayal less about passion and more about power and control, a much harder, colder wound to heal. The fact that Liam was simply buying a product, a child, made the crime against me feel less like a mistake and more like a deeply calculated insult. My mother-in-law, Patricia, never once apologized to me for her initial complicity, but she did acknowledge my tenacity. She sent me a short, cryptic note after the final ruling. "You fought his lies with better accounting." That's a true Holloway strength, even if you don't have the name. It was the closest I would ever get to a familial apology, a strange nod to the fact that I had beaten her son at his own financial game. I realized that my strength wasn't just my emotional resilience, but the logical, practical determination I inherited from my own family, the very qualities Liam had dismissed as unambitious when we first met. I often reflect on the moment Liam called me weak after my miscarriage. That one word, carelessly thrown out in his moment of desperation, was his justification for his monumental betrayal. It became my ultimate driving motivator. I transformed that perceived weakness into an unwavering emotional and financial strength. My ability to survive his deception, pursue legal justice, and rebuild my career on the principle of honesty was the greatest triumph of my life. I learned that weakness lies not in vulnerability or grief, but in the need to lie and control others to achieve personal satisfaction. Liam's fear of vulnerability and messiness led him to a clinical, sterile form of fraud that ultimately cost him his freedom, his career, and his dignity. He tried to buy a legacy, but he ended up buying ruin. My final message to anyone facing a deep, structural betrayal is this: look beyond the affair, look at the money, look at the logistics. The man I thought was my honest husband was meticulously constructing an entire secondary life, not driven by love for another woman, but by a controlling desire for a perfect, sterile outcome. His business partner was his most expensive, crucial investment, a payment for the one thing he felt I couldn't provide. My life is now a testament to the fact that you can rebuild trust, but you must start by trusting your own intuition, especially when the financial lines become suspiciously blurred. I lost my partner, but I found my true strength, and that is a legacy far greater than any son Liam could have paid for. The final powerful irony is that the truth, when it came out, didn't destroy me. It set me free to finally live the honest, successful life I deserved.